Thank you for tuning in to another episode of my Veterans to Success podcast. You probably know by now, my mission is to help 1 million veterans and entrepreneur business owners achieve the dreams, goals, and aspirations they deserve. That is why I created the Veterans to Success podcast, because I get to interview guys, men and women, who want to share their fascinating stories with you about their time before, during and after their time in the military, so you can benefit and overcome your challenges. So sit back, relax, and get ready to be mesmerized, astounded, and entertained. Chris Rose. Chris, I just want to give a little bit about you. You're a former Army officer, very successful. Then you transitioned to NATO as a civil servant, moving on now to a career, a portfolio career, as you describe it. And me knowing a little bit about you, I can definitely agree with you when you say portfolio career. So, Chris, it's important that the listener get an understanding of where you've come from. So tell me a little bit about your life before joining the military so we get a feel for you.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Thanks for that introduction. As far as I'm concerned, I was slightly biased and almost born into a military family. My father was a Royal Engineer in the British Army, and as most Army kids, we travelled around. So in my youth, between the ages of 3 and 5, we were in Germany, in Osnabrück. Not that I remember a great deal of that. And then we bounced around various parts of the UK that many soldiers and sappers will be familiar with, including Waterbeach. And my father went off for a couple of years to Thailand. So we were in a hiring in sort of deepest Sussex. And then come to about 9 years old, I think we'd been in about 4 or 5 different schools, my sister and I, and lived in a number of different countries and different parts of the UK. My father then left the military at the age of around 40 or so, and then we moved to Surrey, where I started a little bit more stability, and went to school in central Surrey. And that took me up to university time.
Brilliant. So you had a varied childhood, I think it will be true to say. And Osnabrück, know it well. I was posted great place, interesting place. And Waterbeach, yes, as a sapper myself, engineer, yeah, Waterbeach does bring back fond memories. So, you've skimmed over that and quite nicely. The fact there's an awful lot would have been going on during your childhood. What sort of challenges did you face as a child, if you remember, the family unit?
Yeah, that's and again nothing particularly unusual for military families. Much more so for civilian families who tend to be, not always these days, of course, but tend to be much more static. So we were moving every 1 to 2 years. At times it felt like we were part of a sort of witness protection scheme. That you have to leave friends, you have to arrive, you're a little bit shy, you have to get to know a completely new school, in some cases a new country, new languages. So it could be, and just as you're settling down, then it's time to move again. So again, this won't be unusual for a lot of military families, but it's quite challenging. And I think that builds a degree of robustness on the one hand. On the other hand, it's quite disruptive from the educational point of view. Hence the need for private schools and boarding schools for those families that wish to go down that route.
Yeah.
And you can see that there's a real challenge in making decisions about whether you have the children live with you or the children go into boarding school, and those all come with their own challenges. And it's affected me to such an extent that I left the army when my daughters were 11 years old, because they'd been to 5 different schools in about 7 years or so, and they needed the stability of education and location
Yeah.
that only being static, could bring. So I think that gives an idea. But again, those families living through that will know that better than I do.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, despite those challenges, and in fact, it gave you a robustness, as you quite rightly said, and despite that, you still decided to join the military. So what? I mean, apart from being maybe slightly mad, what prompted you to join the military?
Yeah, well, the saying that for Royal Engineers, they're either mad, married, or Methodist. In some cases, probably all three. But yeah, I mean, what again, obviously, I was impacted by living in military quarters on military bases with my father's own military career. And it sounded pretty exciting. It sounded as though there was lots of travel involved. There's a little bit of sport, and I was quite enjoying all those aspects. While at school,
Yeah.
and I thought, this would help. Fundamentally, my parents had been able to send me to private school for a few years. I was very, very fortunate, but that was a financial strain. So the option of going and attending, having a bursary to help finance that the army offered to help finance, through university, was also a big draw as well. And that scheme, I think, is still available today. So at the age of 16 and a half, I went off to the Regular Commissions Board, or the Army Officer Selection Board, nervous as hell, younger than virtually everyone else, quite shy and introverted at the time, and sort of scraped through, and luckily was offered a bursary that helped fund, university education. And the commitment after that was doing, Sandhurst or young officer training for Royal Engineers, and then a 2-year tour, which I did in Germany. And I was pretty convinced I was going to leave and do something in the sort of geology and chemistry field that I'd done at university. But actually enjoyed it so much, I stayed for another 27 years. So.
Wow. Yeah, and that is serving your time. And it's quite interesting, I know you touched on the private education, which a lot of people, because we discussed this at some length, Chris, that I did get one particular person say, that officer, what do they know about normal life as an ordinary rank? And we were discussing that rank becomes less important as you become more experienced, if that makes sense. And there's some people blame or hold responsible difference in upbringing. At the end of the day, so long as we all do our best, that's the main thing that matters, isn't it? Certainly.
Absolutely. And I'd say a couple of things. The first one is, I mean, I think compared to a number of people, I have had a very privileged upbringing, and it's important that you recognize that. One of the jobs I had was at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, at running something called Royal Company, where you actually take the potential young officers through a course at Sandhurst before the main commissioning course. And quite a lot of the young cadets coming in at that stage, are lacking a little bit of confidence or something, and those individuals, need quite often broadening. You've seen individuals come through Welbeck University, and maybe even the military university at Shrivenham, and then come and join the army. And those people, some individuals need broadening. So actually going up, attending a soup kitchen and meeting people who are homeless, that's those aspects you need to understand, and the whole breadth of the individuals and all of their backgrounds, and appreciate that, and to be able to lead and manage effectively, and that's in the army and outside the military. So actually taking an interest in people is the first thing I'd say, whatever rank you are. And the second aspect is, I have seen, and we discussed it briefly, private soldiers, junior NCOs coming out into the sort of civilian environment, and really just going out there and making a huge success and running companies. It's not everyone does that, but rank matters virtually not at all once you've left the military. So I think your point there is absolutely right. Nothing is holding you back except yourself. That may be a trite statement, but
that's a great statement, actually, Chris.
Yeah, no, you can see. I've certainly seen some huge, impressive managers of companies and organisations who come out after only a few years in the military and really made a huge difference and taken every opportunity that they could create for themselves.
Yeah, and what I'd like to touch on later during our discussion is the fact that many employers really value call them soft skills, if you will, which are not actually soft skills at all. They're massive skills that you learn in the army that maybe just don't get taught in Civvy Street in the same way. So we'll take, things like responsibility, punctuality, discipline, teamwork, and that sort of stuff. So I'd like just part that for a minute. I'd like you to touch on that. What I'd like to delve in now a little bit more, because I know what a varied career you've had and are having. And being a sapper, I totally understand the responsibilities that you've undertook and taken on board. So tell me a bit about your military career. Where you served, what you got up to, how your training, basic training, and how your military career grew, please.
Yeah, thanks. I'd like to say it was all part of a huge plan, and I know that we have posting departments and career management, but I think, frankly, I've been extremely lucky to have the sort of career in the military that I did have. As I said, I went through Sandhurst. I was going through the post-university course, which is much shorter and sharper than the course for the standard commissioning course at the time. I was even on a platoon commander's warning because the basis of my experience at that stage was a 2-week bridge camp in Ripon, whereas others had territorial army commissions and other huge experience. So I was still trying to put my webbing together in the first sort of week when they were all bringing their second set out. So I won't say that my sort of start at Sandhurst was particularly auspicious. How they let me back as an instructor, I'll never know. But
I could just picture that, actually, Chris. You having doing your best to get your set of webbing together, and everyone's got their spare kit already prepared, and makes you look a bit of a muppet. Yeah,
and I tell you, I felt a bit of a muppet as well. So I go, the young officer course, very well run, sort of Chatham and Midley for the sappers out there, and I was then posted out to 3-5 Engineer Regiment in Hamel at the time. So a BAOR soldier. I'd like to say that not on my own, obviously, but we won the Cold War, and the standard sort of soldiering in terms of being able to go out and lay mines, build bridges, blow bridges up, all the good stuff that would stop the Russian hordes from rolling down the various gaps and into Germany. I had to say, I was sort of almost more interested at the time with everything else that was going on. So within 36 hours of turning up in Germany, I was sent on a train up to Norway to take over the 3-5 Engineer Regiment biathlon and cross-country ski team.
Oh, nice.
Which was very nice, but very hard work because I was quite fit in those days, but the team had most of the team were either British or otherwise biathletes or cross-country skiers. So the standard was incredibly high, and I had to go from sort of basic general fitness to actually try to understand how to stand up on skis and then move quickly, very, very rapidly. But fantastic introduction. So 6 weeks on skis and then back to troop commanding. then taking my troop off to southern France to go and exercise with the French, and off to Berlin to sort of stand in for the Berlin troop, and a little bit more cross-country skiing. And after that, I was then posted back to junior leaders, where I started or continued and developed the cross-country skiing to take those at age 16 all the way through, rather than sort of at the age of 18. And of course, doing some troop commanding as well.
So that's interesting, because I know you're going to share with us the rank you were saying eventually. Now, what interests me is, because I know when I did my physical training instructor's course, from an FE field engineering career, that was put on hold, really, combat engineering, because then I was working in the gym, so my promotion stopped. How did that? Because I mean, I suppose going skiing and Bavaria and by athletes, that's like would be considered as a bit of a Gucci tour. So how did that affect your military career?
Yeah, again, following the theme of not excelling, going through training at Sandhurst, I think I was probably a middle of the road officer, and there were clearly those more senior officers that appreciate the sort of sporting aspect, and all that brings in terms of health, fitness, teamwork, etc. And others who perhaps were less appreciative and frankly saw my time away as a waste of time, and the fact that I was commanding soldiers, and everything in between. So I won't say it necessarily sort of prevented me from moving forward, but it was that I even had one officer write on my report, time to sort of stop doing sport and and start buckling down and doing some work, which may well have just been a reflection on my ability to be able to be a troop commander or
and it may well have reflected on his ability to understand the varieties of spice of life, and the experience you glean from that is really useful.
Yeah, and actually, I didn't take that particularly seriously, because I was still fencing sort of in the Army Championships and taking teams from 39 Engineer Regiment, where I was the CO a little bit later, and doing triathlon as a full colonel, and so I think frankly, it's entirely possible to have a reasonable sporting career. I'm looking at General Ty Urch, he's currently the Chief Royal Engineer, and he's still a incredibly good squash player. So, I think in many ways it's a way of de-stressing, keeping fit, and if you're physically fit, you will know this, Jack, very well. It certainly helps maintaining sort of mental fitness. And as I found out many years later, 12, 13-hour days in the office, day after day, if you're physically fit, your brain can just about keep up with those sorts of challenges as well. So so a little bit further. I mean, I wouldn't say I had a standard to an engineer sort of officer career, but I was lucky enough to troop command, squadron command, including a UN tour in Angola, and then as I mentioned, I was CO 39 Engineer Regiment, looking after the Royal Air Force in wherever they were. Including on a big 6-month exercise out in Oman, exercise Sosaria, which was fabulous. Staying with the Corps, I was Chief of Staff in HQ Royal Engineers, TA, so I set that up for 3 months. I was also regimental or acting regimental colonel for 6 months as well. So that was the sort of sapper side of my career. As I mentioned, lots of instructing. So troop commander, taking 2 troops of cadets through Sandhurst. As a major, I took commanded Royal Company, which one of the best jobs in the army, taking young potential officer cadets and giving them a little bit of extra confidence or skills that may otherwise have been lacking, to enable them to pass the commissioning course.
And what in particular did you enjoy about that? I probably guess, because I really love training men, women, from not knowing to knowing something in different varieties of combat engineering or physical fitness or mind fitness. What did you find most rewarding?
Yeah, I think it's basically being able to identify, with help from the Army Officer Selection Board that did their own job in terms of assessing the suitability of these individuals, and then just looking at them develop, with the standard course, or by producing specific exercises for the individuals to help them adjust, develop, and move on. And I see lots of the products of Rowan and Company who've successfully gone through the commissioning course, successfully commanded soldiers, and actually many of them now come out the other end and are holding down challenging jobs around the world, including one. I'm now doing some work with React, which used to be called Team Rubicon, which takes a whole bunch of blue light, fire, police, and ex-military, and it's a military charity that does sort of disaster relief and response,
Right.
both
Okay.
nationally and across the world. And the ops officer is one of my former Royal Allen cadets. So, it's great to see, the success and the ability, particularly at the age of 18 to 19, that individuals can change within only a few weeks. So that was hugely rewarding, and probably the sort of, as I say, one of the highlights of my career as well. And then after that, odd jobs that don't really sort of sit anywhere. I had 2 years working in defence intelligence. That was fascinating at the end of the Cold War. So where we turned our attention away from the forward, so to a degree, and started looking at the rest of the world. An instructor at the Royal Military College of Science, as it was then, at Shrivenham. And then after that, I was due to be posted to London to go and take on Terrier and Trojan, the two sort of engineered tanks, towards completion. And due to a whole variety of different reasons, I ended up going to the Geneva Centre for Security Policy in Switzerland and spending 9 months on a fabulous course, trying to really understand at the age of 39, what the international environment was all about, sort of politics and how defence fitted in amongst all of that, with some Americans, Europeans, and Russians, on this course, where I think it had been set up for Western European to educate Eastern European soldiers, civil servants, and diplomats in how to do things. It didn't quite work out because there were some incredibly bright Eastern Europeans who frankly were very, very comfortable, aware, and went on to do amazing things as well. So,
how did you find the processes and culture between the Eastern Europeans, the Americans, with the British processing methods, if that makes sense?
Yes, it does. I mean, I think if it hasn't been done already, somebody could probably write a PhD on all of that. It was very interesting seeing that sort of, I won't say it was a clash of cultures, because the sort of military and defence theme running through it was, something we were all familiar with. And then that's something which I've seen, is international defence individuals, particularly serving military. They all have there's a common theme of service, of being within a defence and military setting that brings you together, and there are more similarities than differences. With civil servants, and particularly later when I ended up working at NATO headquarters in different roles, it was quite interesting to see that the military are very much, here's a problem, let's solve it, let's get on and make a difference. On the civil service and the diplomatic and political side, it was much more awareness of what was going on in London or capitals, sensitivities. I learned actually there that doing nothing for a little while and seeing how things develop sometimes could be the right answer, not something that's just naturally from our side. And then looking at the international environment, I wouldn't say there were huge differences. Lots of differences in expertise, lots of national, challenges and differences. If you come from the Baltic states, the size of your military is not huge. So operating at the divisional core level is something that isn't, really natural at all, and requires sort of, training and education. But their awareness of what was going on, more than made up for that.
And thank you for that. So you attained the rank of brigadier. What prompted you to decide, right, that's it, I'm off, I've had enough?
Really difficult. And I hope my family don't listen to this. But fundamentally, I'd finished a job at NATO headquarters where I was the secretary to the NATO Military Committee. Absolutely fabulous. 3 years sitting in between the military of NATO and the the political side. And I quite often represented the military in the political environment of NATO headquarters. And after that, it was quite difficult because I wasn't sure where I would be going. There, possibility of staying in Brussels, which would have given a little bit more stability for the family. In the end, and I have a vote of thanks to the head of the engineers at the time, who I think argued on for my case that I was going to go off to the Falklands. But I'd realised at that stage that my twin daughters, were 12 years old.
Right.
They had been to 5 schools in their 7 years in 3 different countries. And this was going to just extend the school, bouncing around the schools, types of education. So it was time for stability. My wife was ex-Royal Air Force. And we decided that we wanted to have the girls with us and not go down the boarding school route. So it was simple. Either the girls and my wife went off and waited somewhere for me to come back in 2 years' time, or I'd have to leave. And for obvious reasons, I don't regret leaving at the time. I would have loved to have continued serving, but I had a family, and so I was lucky enough to get a job as a NATO civil servant down in Luxembourg at the time, the NATO Maintenance and Supply Agency, as one of the directors there, and that gave the girls from the ages of 12 to 18 one school, one country, one language, and one place, and a set of friends as well, as they left. So
that's a critical time in schooling, really. And isn't it interesting? Because what I picked up there is that you used your various stops in schools as a child yourself as maybe a benchmark or a template to say, I know what they could go through and I know what I prefer them to go through. And obviously making that decision with your wife too. So that's very interesting. Now, you mentioned though that you then got a job with NATO. What was the transition like from being in the military to and not knowing a great deal about your time with NATO yet? What was it like to go from the military to NATO, and effectively you're a civilian then? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, actually, it was. I mean, I cheated because the NATO Maintenance and Supply Agency, whilst it was an entirely civilian organisation in Luxembourg, had strong links to the military, and a lot of the individuals in NAMSA at the time in Luxembourg were ex-military. So it was working in the defence environment. It was working still in the public sector effectively. It was working with a lot of ex-military, albeit very international. I think about 20-something different nations represented. So in many ways, it was on that side. It wasn't too challenging. I was lucky enough to be able to move from Brussels 2 hours down the road by car to Luxembourg, but I had to find a flat, somewhere to live. And in the end, that was quite challenging. I literally went down to Luxembourg for a day, looked at 6 properties, picked one of them, and said, right, that's where we're going to live. In hindsight, as we moved out and broke the contract with the owner 18 months later, because there was mold growing everywhere and the heating wasn't working over Christmas, I perhaps could have spent a little bit more time actually looking at making sure we got the right place in the right location. But in many ways, that on the job front, for me, it was pretty familiar. For the girls, we moved at Christmas. So obviously, the school year starts in September. And what had happened is all the cliques, the 12-year-old girls had all got together in September, all got to know each other by December. Yeah. So when the girls arrived in January as newbies, and they probably the only two newbies in the whole school, that was very challenging for them. It took them a while to sort of, to settle, make friends and establish themselves. So that was a challenge. For my wife, she had been, serving in the Royal Air Force, and it took a while for her to then be able to find a job, and to be able to work part-time there. And language, the language of the organization was English and French, the two languages of NATO. So, being able to speak some French, I was fortunate that I was able to be able to, understand everything that was going on more or less. Some of the challenges is, I had a boss who, the only way I can sort of work it out is that he was a bit jealous of my network, and frustratingly wouldn't let me use that network to the benefit of the organization and of NATO. Something about self-preservation or there are all sorts of reasons. So there were frustrations.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I know, actually, thank you for sharing that. And what I'd like to do is dig a little bit deeper on the fact, because I know how positive you are, and as sappers we are, aren't we?
Yeah.
And the thing is that you said a few things there that, well, with hindsight, right? So you were living in an apartment that had mold, and then your daughters started a school in January, right? When all of the cliques had established themselves from starting in the previous September. How low were things then?
Yeah, I won't say that there weren't occasions when I was quietly thinking to myself, did I make the right choice here? Should I have stayed in? Would my family and back in probably London or the UK, and me in the Falklands, whizzing backwards and forwards, and maybe having holidays in Ascension Island, that would have been nice. Was it the right choice? Having said that, there are some really lovely people, and so often the people that you work with, whether that's in the army, outside of the army, wherever you happen to be, make all the difference. And also the responsibility. NATO salaries are not bad, but fundamentally you're away from home. You're out of your own country. You're working in another culture. And Luxembourg had its own particular culture as well. Luckily, there was a sort of big expat community, and of course, I've still got Luxembourgish friends. But it isn't. It's not a big city. It's a sort of a village where everybody knows each other, and that's good and bad. So yeah, there were times when I thought, is this going to work? Am I going to have to try something different? We also had a change after about 18 months. The NATO Secretary General at that time had basically driven through agency reform, which meant we were then having to reform and pull three agencies together, one in Paris, one in Luxembourg, and one in Hungary. And I got a change of jobs. The general manager asked if I would be the chief of staff and deputy general manager, which added a lot of extra stress, because effectively what we were doing was continuing the day job and pulling the three agencies together, rewriting all the documentation, all the SOPs, all the processes. And it would have been nice to have started with some, but there were virtually none. So we had to start from scratch and then crash these three agencies into one. And that was what you did in your spare time whilst you weren't doing the day job, So it was quite hard work, and that meant that my wife had to be the rock, on which the rest of the family, myself and my daughters, depended at the time, which was quite stressful and challenging for her, as you might imagine.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
in
yeah.
a
Of course.
country, with no, rare visits from family, and we're just that little bit further away. But you talk, you get through it, and you try and make the best you can.
Thank you for that. I really appreciated you being open with that because it's like when people say, "Oh yeah, it's really easy," it's success. And sometimes when you reflect on it, you say, "Well, yeah, it took 15 years to become an overnight success." And guess what? There were challenges, and there were times where I cried myself to sleep, or at least I felt like doing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does. I mean, emotion obviously sort of is always there, and yeah, as military people, we're always sort of we cope, we make it work, and we do, and
Yeah,
that's the huge benefits of being in the military is, and afterwards as you transition to civilian life, is the resilience, is the self-belief and confidence, even if it might look like a sort of slightly thin veneer at times,
yeah.
and you're doing the paddling like there's no tomorrow under the surface,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
driving the car on the top.
No,
But
well,
you realize everybody else has got the challenges. You've always got friends somewhere, you can talk to,
but
and the family unit is pretty important
mm,
in being able to help yourselves through it as well.
and that's led nicely into and excellently into this uh, question of what's the secret to your success? What's the big driver? And I know I know I could see the expression on your face there. There's all sorts going on.
Yeah.
So what? How could you put that into a few words? I'm not sure that's possible, really.
Um, I, yeah, and I'm trying to make it sort of, I wouldn't say success, but I think, there are skills you develop in the military that are generic, so it's fundamentally, in my view, and we've really touched on it, it's your ability to understand people. Where are they coming from? What are their challenges? What are their aspirations? What are they bringing to the party? And what are the barriers for them to be successful? And you apply that to yourself as well. So I think flexibility, and again, the ability to just, we switch jobs every 1 to 2 to 3 years, and sometimes you can find yourself doing something completely different, 3 years late, every 3 years. And that we take it for granted, but actually that's not normal in
No.
civilian life. A lot of, there's more flexibility and movement these days, but actually the amount of different jobs where you bounce around and different levels you operate at, um, that gives enormous flexibility and enormous resilience as well. The ability to get on with people, as I mentioned, the networks that you have um, within the military and that you build, and also I think your ability to solve problems. And on top of that, the military skills that you come out with as well. And that depends whether you're in the engineers, the artillery, in the navy or the air force. You would have had quite a lot of training as you come through. Um, Quite often more than the private sector would be willing to pay for.
Yeah.
So actually, just reflecting on the utility of that, and making sure that it finds its way onto your CV in a way that civilians will understand what that training course you did that you've forgotten about. It doesn't really matter, but actually it does matter because it's given you another skill set, and it's built up, all of the different skills that you can then bring to civilian organization. So I'd say it's a bit of that. The army's trained me a lot in a lot of different ways, and I've been very fortunate
Mm.
to to use that as much as I could.
Yeah, and I like your self-questioning technique of how to understand, like what challenges, what are the issues, what's happening, and the flexibility and social. And it only dawned on me. I'm not even sure it dawned on me until I'd left the engineers that in the engineers you quite often got posted because of your trade and what strengths they needed. So you would go to an engineer regiment on your own, whereas usually infantry or artillery would move as a battalion. We would be just just posted in and dropped into a unit, and then we'd have to get social. We'd have to understand the different characteristics, which I found very useful. How did that transpire in your?
Um, for me, it kept things really fresh. There was no chance of getting bored, because the next job was 12, 15, 18 months away. It was almost certainly in a different place, doing some different stuff, which meant that, as you say, you had to understand the environment very quickly. Work out what the levers were, and how you could then make yourself useful in amongst all of that. And I think that as you say, and there's the sort of family regiments in the infantry and the rest of other parts of the military. And there are those like the corps, like the engineers, where it's not just the family is moving, the children changing schools, wife is maybe working or not working, but you yourself are having to assimilate rapidly into a new organization. And I think again that builds the ability to get to know people quickly. Of course, making that assumption outside, you'll go and knock on your next door neighbor's door in the military, you're all coming from the same background and you're making sure that they're settling in okay. You do that in the civilian world and some of them go, what do you want?
Yeah.
Well, it's not necessarily quite the same. Maybe it's not like that, but it's not quite the same thing, so there are transitions that are important, for the family and the individuals. But I think, again, that resilience, that flexibility, that ability to understand the situation, find the solution, sort out the wheat from the chaff, and then make something work is it's not unique to the military, but it's something we do, every day of our working life.
And particularly well, in fact, you've just given me a flashback there to the 4-man room, bed space. You put your locker, your top locker, just this is my space. If you want to come in here, knock on. And I think, like, a civilian would think, what are you knocking on the top box for? But that's the domain, the peaceful area, the sanctuary, if you like. So thank you for giving me an insight into the secret of your success, which appears to me to be flexibility and to be able to move with change. So equally, and we've already discovered, because you've been kind enough to share, there were a few moments where you were questioning your decisions. How do you deal with failure?
Probably badly, I would say. But luckily, luckily, I would like to think that I haven't had to deal with it sort of, too often. I think fundamentally, it's to sort of, it's to have the confidence to stop and actually say, hang on, what's just happened here? To do a little bit of analysis, to ask why something happened, because it's very easy to be disappointed in yourself, to lose confidence once you've made a mistake. But actually, the context may be that you didn't make the mistake at all. Maybe somebody else made a mistake or created the circumstances where you had, and in the end, ended up having no choice. So, ask why, what happened, analyze it, why it happened, allow a pause for emotion, because there'll always be emotion with failure. It'll be disappointment in yourself, disappointment in others, sometimes disappointment and frustration in the circumstances that have created that failure. But more often than not, it's trying to understand why it happened, what to do about it, to make it better. And if you genuinely made a mistake at work without really understanding it, but it was your fault that something didn't happen, if you need to apologize, go and do that. If you need to learn from it, and frankly, this is, I still maintain some links with the military, and I'm constantly asked by those outside in some of the sort of discussions I have, how does the military deal with failure? Well, the military deals with failure and treats, more often than not, as a learning experience. What went wrong? Why did it go wrong? What can we do to sort it out? Let's make it work better the next time. So I think that's the sort of approach that I would like to think I take, and not to make that same mistake again, and learn from others as well as yourself. But also, as I say, making that the time for the emotions to flow out, because they'll be there alongside. And if you don't sort them out at the time, you'll be, thinking about the mistake you made for decades later, and it'll be getting in the way, and it'll act as a sort of block potentially. So important to recognize, that their emotions will come along with failure, and failure in whose terms. I think that's always worth asking as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And yeah, I hope that's some sort of answer. That's what I like.
That's a brilliant answer. And I mean, so really, the stop, analyze, or stop, regroup,
Yeah.
and ask questions, because questions are the answers, aren't they? Because I remember on a it was a training exercise for EOD, and actually I neutralized the device excellently. There was no danger out, so I thought, until the feedback was given, and he failed me. And the guy who failed me, great, he brilliant. I would not question him. He was a fantastic bomb disposal officer. He failed me, and I beat myself up severely on it. And then afterwards, I thought, totally right, that I should fail. Because what had happened, right, everything on the actual neutralizing the device went great. But what I hadn't factored in, and my number 2 was MT and POL. So we knew all about lubrication fuel. We had a big tank Bowser above the device, and we calculated the clearance zone wrong. We put a few hundred meters in. It should have been 3/4 of a mile at least, because if I hadn't neutralized that device, people would have died. So I didn't fail on that. What I failed on was my intel.
Yeah, and again, I think lessons learned. The guy could have easily said, technically, you passed. Yeah. Would you have learned a lesson in the same way? Probably not. No, I think it's, as you say, good call from the instructor, even though it was probably a hard one.
Yeah, it was. It was a tough lesson. I thought, I've done it. So you've mentioned a lot, and during our discussion, I've discovered that your network is quite extensive. How important do you think having a strong social and business network is to your success, and in fact, to anyone's success?
I would say, frankly, it's very important. The social aspect can be professional as well, and there is, in the military, we have a sort of blurred lines between your social and the sort of business, and that happens in the civilian environment as well. I won't say that if you're playing golf, and doing work on the golf course, and I was a very bad golfer, so not something that I can particularly relate to. But it is important, and in the transition process, I think one of the, and I'll mention it later, I think, is the issue of the network, and the build up of the business network, because we can be quite sensitive, about whether or not we should call up, X, Y, or Z, and talk about jobs with people. Whereas actually in the world, in the business environment, you know, anything that can help the business move on or get a job, is okay. And I think we as military should recognize that when we join the civilian environment, using a network to get work, to get ahead, to make connections, that may well be sort of slightly selfishly beneficial to both parties in the future, absolutely necessary. Because when I was leaving the military the first time, um, I went put my CV on LinkedIn, sort of all very new to me at the time, um, and I was shortlisted without even asking for 2 jobs. Not that I went for those, but having that initial network, somebody that knew somebody that ended up sort of knowing me, and I've a few conversations, and I was being offered work, which was amazing to me that would actually happen. So yeah, business networks and social networks, because as you transition, it will be culturally different. It will be some changes, and maintaining those links with the military, because those civilian links won't quite have the same flavour. One of the reasons I've gone back to React is because actually, we were doing security at the Birmingham Commonwealth Games or the vaccination centres sort of locally. Is you've got a whole bunch of ex-military all coming together, and there's no doubt you miss that. You miss that type of camaraderie, and that is one of the ways of also getting it, albeit through a military charity. So the social network is supporting you as you move through from the military into the civil world, and the business network helping you find the job, find out what it is you want to do, find opportunities. Yeah, you can't have enough, frankly, in my view.
Hey, do you enjoy sipping a good glass of wine? As you know, sipping too much wine can leave you feeling groggy in the mornings. For less than the price of a good bottle of wine, you can gain access to valuable business and life resources gained from my over 37 years in business and 15 years in the military. These world-class resources are designed to help you achieve the goals, dreams, and aspirations you deserve. So visit joelteams.com now to find out more. That's JOETEAMS.com to find out more. Well, thank you for that. I picked up on something there that, uh, and maybe you'll understand this phrase once I frame it. What's in it for me? I suppose because you did touch on the fact that you were interviewed or shortlisted, accepted for 2 jobs that you didn't take. So how much did what's in it for me and what's in it for you, the employer, comes into it, and what's your selection process for that?
I think it's the sort of job finding sort of aspect of it is, and if you're in a fortunate position to be able to have a choice of jobs, I was still thinking, what is it I want to do? You know, earn money was high up there. Going through school, so needing to earn money was up there, but it wasn't the only consideration. Where did I want to work? There was another job in Jordan, doing some training there, and I spoke to one of the guys who was actually leaving that organization
Right.
because
Okay.
he said, it's not a nice place to work. The expats aren't treated very well, and I'm leaving. And I thought, well, there's a red flag. So definitely don't. Yeah. But again, the network. I knew somebody who knew somebody working for that firm. Ex-military. So I could email him and ring him up and have that conversation. So I think it's quite challenging. I would say that, and I actually spent money on talking to with a mate who was a life and business coach, because I was trying to work out what is it I want to do next. Yes, I need to earn money, but actually, where do I want to do that? what is it I want to do? Where am I going to feel comfortable and happy? Where are my family going to have, good education for my daughters? Where's my wife going to enjoy living, and potentially be able to work? All of those factors come into play, and I went from, Christ, I need a job, I need to go, excuse me.
No, so quite all right.
I need to sort of, transition and get earning to, hang on, it's not just about earning for earning's sake. I can get a job. I'm lucky enough to be able to have a number of options. And actually, it's about the environment. It's about the whole picture of what to do, where it is. Is it going to be fulfilling for me? Are the family going to be able to, do all the things that we want to be able to do? Because there's no point, jumping from the frying pan into the fire and then finding out you're actually hating the job or the environment, or that's all good, but the living in, situation isn't good. So yeah, that's, I hope, some sort of answer to the question.
No, it is entirely, and that leads me nicely into how you've positioned yourself and what sort of coaching, guidance, support, mentoring you've had as an individual. Because I know, I would imagine that you've given some great tips, because you've already said that you've brought some officer cadets through from nothing to something, and then you've seen them being in charge of various projects and watched how they develop and grow. So how important do you think coaching and mentoring has been to shaping you as an individual, and also how it could help someone else become the best they can be?
That's, I think all military people and natural coaches and mentors, because, after you've done, whether it's on the, whether you're a lance corporal or a lieutenant, a warrant officer or a colonel, you are spending time looking after people and helping those people who are going through what you've been through. So within the military, where, there's a natural degree of coaching, both professionally and sort of, personally. I've been very lucky. I've had some great commanding officers. I've had some great, senior NCOs that I've worked with who, frankly, they didn't know it at the time, but they were mentoring me, particularly when I was, a sort of, young troop commander, or even an OC or a CO. You're learning all the time from people. So as far as sort of coaching and mentoring is concerned, for me, it was extremely helpful to have that conversation, frankly, at the age of, 50 odd, talking to somebody about, okay, well, what is it you want to do now? And I went, I don't know. And embarrassing, really. You got the kids leaving school going, what are we going to do?
Yeah,
and you got dad saying,
you're supposed to have all the answers, by the way.
Absolutely, yeah. So it was easy for the children. I basically said, go and do what you want to do. And they said, well, why don't you do that? Well, all right. It was probably the best coaching and mentoring I got from one of the daughters. But
that's a great question.
Yeah, I do know people have gone off, and actually deliberately taken time out between leaving the military to starting a civilian job. First you can, because you can take a couple of months to draw breath, to really work out what it is you want to do, where you want to do it, all that sort of thing. Others have walked, they've gone out and walked for sort of 6-7 weeks across the north of Spain to Santiago de Compostela, or other things where they've just gone off, given themselves a chance to reflect, look back over the successes of the military career, which actually can end up working into a CV as well, and also reflecting what it is you want to do next. Not always, you don't always come out with the right answer or something definitive, but it can help, in the transition process, and realize that you're going to be doing something different in a different culture, in a different environment.
And to expand on that, because you've already touched on it, which is great, because we're going down a structured path that brings us onto the next question, which is how valuable and transferable are the skills that you learn and discover in the military?
Yeah, again, very valuable. And you've already mentioned, Joe, the soft skills, and you these are skills that are not unique in the military, but pretty much everybody in the military has them, which isn't necessarily to the same degree in the civil environment. So, the fact that you turn up, you do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's not always the case anywhere, frankly, but it's more so in the military than elsewhere. I've found. Timeliness. I won't say that I'm always on time, but
Well, you've been pretty much on time for our meetings anyway. This time.
well, that's two successes, so that's good. Uh, the honesty and trust that you can expect, or you expect within the military, not always necessarily so obvious. The ability to sort of see and identify what the real problem is. Again, I mentioned sorting out the wheat from the chaff, and to come up with an answer. I don't think it's just uniquely a Royal Engineer thing. I think it's true across all of the military that we're good at being able to identify what the real problem is and then come up with solutions. And that's at any level. The hands-on aspect, it doesn't matter how senior you are as an NCO or officer, you can still get in amongst it, get your hands on, and then step back when you need to. Working with people, confidence, and leadership and management, again, at all levels, at all times. And the mental and physical resilience and strength that you can keep going when, frankly, others might not. So lots of the sort of soft skills. And then, of course, we've already talked about the training that you've got in the military, recognizing how that can then be translated into, civvy English, if you like, on your CV, where you've been through lots of training that will have given you skills that should, many of them, be applicable, hard skills as opposed to the soft skills, all of which, combine to, in one individual. So, but it's important to draw those out and don't assume that those are taken for granted out in the civilian world. Highlight them, the strengths that you can bring to that company. And as always in sort of recruiting, it's all about working out what problem you're going to solve that the company has got. And I think that's pretty key. What problem has the company got? Why are they hiring for a role? And how are you going to answer their question and solve it for them? But that's standard recruitment stuff.
And that's great, because I think that, in fact, I was speaking to someone who's still serving. He's a client of mine for financial investments, and he's in a position. He's in a position where he's not sure about whether to stay in or leave, and we were talking about what his qualifications are, and his qualifications are immense. If you transfer his skills into civilian speak, it's just amazing, and yet he's not confident of getting a job in Civvy Street, and I think that could be an issue. Yeah,
it is. I mean, I think I have thought at various stages of my sort of military time about leaving. Because I think it's always healthy to just think about, is this the right time to leave? What's waiting for me in the future in the military? What else might I be doing? Is there something else that I'd rather do? I think it's always healthy when you're serving to have that, ask yourself that sort of question at various stages. Even if the answer is, quite often, no, I'm happy doing what I'm doing. I'm prepared to give the military a bit more of a go. You don't know, of course, that you're going to get a job until you jump. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there's a lot of help out there. I mean, there's, all the support and help that you provide, Joe. There are many other organizations, many of them run by veterans, to actually help people. And that's on the professional recruiting side. I can mention a few, if you like.
Yeah. Please do. Yeah.
Job Oppo, United Defence and Security Solutions. They've got a recruiting arm. A chap called John Stevenson in the Forces Transition Group, ex-Mill. There's a whole bunch of Leaders Link. There's a whole bunch of organisations, that are out there to help veterans get jobs. And on top of that, there's a whole bunch of charities and other organisations helping those who feel they need help, whether that's mental health, physical health, transitioning, well-being, justice issues, finance issues. There are organisations out there, many of them charities, who can help. So you're not on your own when you're transitioning. It might feel like that sometimes, but there are people and organisations that are prepared to help. And I think, as far as you're in that chap you were talking about with lots of transferable skills, ultimately it's for that individual to work out what it is he wants to do and to ask himself those questions. I think it's pretty clear from what you're saying, he'll be able to get a job. But is it the right job for him?
Yeah.
And secondly, that, we all have to leave at some stage,
Mm.
ultimately. So, if you can be the master of destiny and decide when you want to leave, when it's right for you, and that's never an easy one, or for many people, it's not easy. Then, I think start working on the whole resettlement and transition piece as soon as possible. And frankly, I'm having conversations with Headquarters Southwest and others about starting the resettlement process from the time you join the army.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting, because when I coach, when I'm looking at the mastermind that I run, one of the important subjects we look at is, okay, you're setting up a business, what's your exit strategy?
Yeah, yeah, yes. I
Because,
think that's You should
but if
always be thinking through that. Yeah,
because if you start with the end in mind, it makes the journey so much better, doesn't it?
yeah. And it also, again, I think you're right. We've talked about some of the aspects that military service will bring, including confidence. But that confidence can look pretty thin at times, or can be pretty thin at times, because we don't know what it's like in City Street. When you're serving, you've got what you think it might look like, but actually, it can be different. But
Oh, go on, sorry. Yeah.
no, I mean, it's just to say that actually, we're all humans outside and
Yeah.
inside. We all start as civilians and finish as civilians, pretty much. So, actually, if you then compare the quality of the individuals across the military and put that in comparison across the civilian environment, you won't be surprised to see that actually, those people in the military bring a whole range of skills and, characteristics and performance that will stand them in great stead within the civilian environment once they're settled and they've found what's good for them.
And I always found it interesting. And hey, I put my hand up to say, uh, I probably, well, when I was in the military, I always thought that I was a part-time civilian, because I like to think that I had also had a career or a living outside of the military. The old adage, civilians, right? We both know what the following words are. But then I thought, well, no, I am a civilian, and I've got to get rid of that mentality. You've got to be left behind. Does that make sense?
It, yes, it does. I mean, ultimately, when you're leaving, you're jumping into the civilian pool. And no matter how much we might feel uncomfortable about that, ultimately, if you allow your military expertise to shine, you will shine in that civilian pool. But it's the big pool. It's culturally much broader, and that can be quite a shock for some people. So I would say that, and it's very clear, I think 80-90% of the sort of, military find themselves, reasonably comfortable within the sort of civilian environment quite quickly. Not the case for everyone. And it's quite interesting. I've mentioned React as an organization people, get back together with those ex-military people. There are other military, breakfast, sort of ex-service breakfast clubs, other reunions, and actually there's no doubt, you form generally stronger bonds in the military than compared in the civilian environment. And I certainly find it's quite healthy occasionally to get back into that sort of military, sort of ex-military groove, and have great conversations and beers with veterans,
Yeah.
and those bonds are good to maintain,
Yeah.
because
Well,
it's important.
yeah. Well, it's like when I discovered you're a sapper. Right? I know straight away your pedigree. I know what your challenges will have been. If you tell me where you've been posted, I've got a pretty good idea what you had, because even though you didn't skirt or brush over it, you just said, right, this is how it was. Well, when you were a troop commander in BAOR and you were on FTX, whichever one it was, Lionheart or Crusader or whatever, I know that minefield between Div 1, 2, 3, 4 had to go in within 36 hours, and you didn't sleep. Then you went
No.
on to demolitions, bridges, then you went on to something else, and you were pretty chin strapped.
Yeah, and it was 3.5 week, 4 week exercise, and you were literally bouncing from one thing to another. Normally, if it ain't raining, it ain't training. So the weather wasn't particularly good. It was
Yeah.
cold. If you're lucky, you had a Spartan or a what were those wheeled vehicles, logistic vehicles?
Oh, what you were in the CBRT, the Spartan,
Yeah.
or the APC,
Yeah.
what was the other one?
I'm trying to remember the name of it, but there was a sort of big wheeled vehicle, for logistics, for carrying things on the back of, and just between the cab and the carrying area, there was a lot of heat. So if you were
On the louvers, yeah,
exactly, you go and stand there and sort of dry out for 5 minutes, if you had the time, just when you were completely soaked. But yeah, I mean there were some great memories anyway.
So, and I know we could definitely pull up a sandbag because we could just keep talking for days, I'm sure. So what is it for you next then? What have you got lined up?
Yeah, so at the moment I'm in my sort of early to mid 60s, so I'm fortunate enough, that I don't have to sort of do a lot of work, and I think that's something that I would certainly recommend is as you depart the military, is to have an understanding of what money you need, what you need to earn, for your circumstances. And I've sort of my sister's recommended a friend of hers who runs a financial sort of planning company, and occasionally I go and talk to them, and they talk to me about what I need to earn or not at various stages. And I think that's good to understand, because knowing whether you need to work for money, how much you need to work for money, that helps you balance your time. So for now, I'm fortunate I don't have to do a great deal of work, like sort of financially. So as I mentioned, React, doing the operational leaders course that can then basically mean I can do disaster response sort of worldwide. I've done some sort of leadership and management training for BMW, working for United Defence and Security Solutions, which employs around sort of 300-400 ex-military, run ex-general, but basically looking at offering defence advice at all ranks. So that's worth a look. They've got, as I mentioned, they've got a recruiting arm. So, they're basically placing a lot of ex-military in civilian companies. A number of military companies around the world have asked me if I would work for them. Some of them are a bit dodgy, so I think the answer is no. And I'm looking to sort of wind that aspect down. I'm still doing some consultancy for my old agency in the NATO Support and Procurement Agency based in Luxembourg, and really enjoying that. And the other aspect that's taking more and more of my time is working for the Veterans Advisory and Pensions Committee in the Southwest, where I'm the vice chair of the committee. And what that does is it looks at, and a small plug here, if I may, is it looks at how veterans are transitioning, what the quality of life is like, how the government is looking after them or not, how they are being sort of, how their resettlement is going, how the charities are looking after them as well. And we're at the level where we make recommendations every 6 months at the moment back to the Minister for Armed Forces, Veterans and families on what policy is working in the Southwest, what isn't working, and what they should be doing different. So there's that connecting the dots in how charities looking after the military. And I'm also working with as secretaries to the national chairs. So, we actually look at how best practice from one district, one county, one region of the country is provided, and where that can then be passed to other organizations. So, I stay very interested in veterans, what's working, what isn't working, where it isn't working in terms of their own pensions. We're able to offer some advice and guidance on how they might approach a tribunal, in terms of getting their particular pension reassessed. There's only about 20 of us or 200 across the country, so we can't take every individual veteran, but having an understanding of what isn't working for veterans and then feeding that back into the minister is taking more and more of my time, and it's fascinating. I like to think that I'm paying back a little bit, for the fantastic time I've had in the military and helping veterans, particularly those in need, having better lives.
Well, that's remarkable, and I know that you will be posing some challenging and interesting questions in a very deep, meaning sense to get to the bottom of things and doing your bit to make a difference. So, thank you for sharing that. Now, the Columbo question, if you like, because I love Columbo. I think he was great. And just one more thing, right? So before you go, Chris, you've shared with us about being flexible, how ex-military and military pairs are really good at coaching and mentoring, and questioning techniques are really good, and the trust and the timeliness and the honesty, integrity of military is a really important qualities. So what's the one top tip you would give to a veteran, someone who's leaving the military, or even someone who's a civilian and wants to adopt some of the practices of military personnel? What's the one big tip you give that'd make the biggest difference with them achieving their success?
That's really difficult, Joe, to narrowing it down. I mean, if I were given 3, for example,
okay, you can be greedy, go on.
And then I can narrow it down to the top tip, all those 3. I think the first one is sort of, to have self-belief and patience, because, there's no doubt that being in the military brings soft and hard skills that are very valuable out in the civilian world. But it's not always evident when you're leaving. It can be quite challenging getting that job that you want and getting somebody to pay you a decent wage to use those skills. But I think it will take time. It'll take a little bit of time to, work out what it is you want to do. And once you've done that, to have the self-belief, confidence, and patience to know you will get there. It may not be the first week or the first month or even, frankly, the first year. You may be doing some work, but maybe not what it is you really want to do. But keep plugging away at it, in the same way that we know all the military can, and you will get there.
Yeah.
If you need, and this is a sort of subset of that top tip, if you need some education and training to do the transition, I mean, there are lots of companies out there, some of them, frankly, looking, better than others. Let me put it like that. Get that
very diplomatic of you, that.
Yeah, thank you. Get that education, training, and advice. Preferably from veterans who know your situation, or as advised by. And then the third aspect linked to those two is know that there's help out there. It's not always obvious, not always available, easily available and easily found on the internet, but the Veterans Gateway, the Office of Veterans Affairs, Vets UK, all sorts, the NHS, there are lots of organisations out there that understand veterans and that are ready to help. Some more than others. Perhaps the NHS, they're willing, and there's courage and all sorts of things out there where they're trying to help, but they've got their own challenges at the moment.
Yeah.
So I'd say self-belief and patience. Find out what's out there, talk to veterans, talk to people, and find out what's out there. And if you need education and training to get the final job that you really want, then get it. Get that education and go for it.
And thank you so much for that. And it's, you know what, I actually, and I shudder to think how much money's been spent on your training. I actually did a costing exercise on what it would cost to train me for combat engineer, class 1, plumber and pipe fitter, physical training instructor, bomb disposal specialist, all the rest. It was getting close to £1 million.
Absolutely, yeah, and very, very rare that you would have that degree of training out in the civilian environment. Again, my conversations with, for example, BMW, they do a lot of training for a civilian organisation, but nothing like to the depth and the extent that we do, and the breadth as well. So there you are.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for such an interesting time, and I know we're going to take it offline because we've got other stuff that we want to share, and I know that there's a lot of synergy that we can do to help veterans and their loved ones get even better results. So, Chris, until we speak again, thank you so much.
Joe, absolute pleasure, and thanks for the opportunity. And yeah, I hope that's been useful, and I look forward to keeping up and keeping in touch with you, Joe. Cheers.
Most definitely. Thank you. Cheers. JoeTeams.com is a resource I have created to fulfill my mission to help 1 million veterans and business entrepreneurs like you achieve the goals, dreams, and aspirations they deserve. JoeTeams.com is jam-packed full of valuable resources specifically designed to help you on your journey to success. Visit JoeTeams.com now to find out how you can join and start your journey to success immediately. That's JoeTeams.com, JoeTeams, JoeTeams.com. And until we meet again, have a brilliant day.